Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Republic Broadcasting. Since we're currently in a pandemic, it seems like a great time to do a podcast. So, I'm Keegan. Today here with me is Ben. Say hi, Ben.
I'm Ben.
So, what we're going to be talking about today is going to go into the first arc of the Clone Wars Season 7 that's premiering on Disney+. And starting off, though, we're going to do a little bit of news, then go into the Clone Wars, and then just make our way into a fun fact that we think everybody might be interested in. So, starting off with some news, the first thing that I have is that there's going to be a new Star Wars novel called The Queen's Peril, which is going to focus on Padme and her life as Queen of Naboo. So I assume it's going to be the time in between when she meets Anakin and then goes back and just does Queen stuff. Do you know anything more about it, Ben, or would you assume differently? You think it's before Anakin?
No, because she's only around the age of 14 in episode 1, so I assume it takes place in the 10-year gap between episode 1 and episode 2, after she meets Anakin. And then I'm interested to see how this ties in because, spoiler for Queen Shadow, at the end of that book ended with her death. That's going to be interesting. It's going to tie into that. So it's not really a direct sequel. It's just a different time period and kind of possibly going through around the same time frame as well.
Interesting.
So I guess the way that's working is that the death in the book was more of an epilogue. Padme's death in Queen Shadow is more of an epilogue to the story of the book. It's just interesting because I wouldn't have expected a sequel after that book, but now that we're getting it, I'm definitely interested. So
yeah. So the next piece of news that I have, so to speak, is that, and it's kind of, in my opinion, big news. It follows. It's going to be the High Republic. So about 250 years or so ago, they're going to kind of focus on that era, and it's more of when the Jedi Order was kind of in full throttle and they were doing everything kind of almost correctly. And I would say it's before they started to kind of really downfall as an organization.
my guess would be that you see kind of the seeds of it back then, but not to the point where it's actively causing problems like it did with Dooku and Anakin. Because it doesn't seem like this. It seems like Dooku was the first Jedi in a very long time to fall. At least that's the impression that I get. So it'd be interesting to see what's going on there. It kind of seems like we'll get the Jedi as version that Obi-Wan kind of describes to Luke in episode 4.
Yeah, when they were really policing the universe and making sure things were keeping peace rather than kind of following a political agenda.
And less bureaucracy, more actually doing things. So that'll definitely be interesting. It looks like it takes place across comics and books. I don't believe that there's anything for movies or TV shows yet. But I assume at some point
TV shows will definitely come into play. And actually, I do think there's one TV show that is coming out, and it's going to be, the style is going to be for a younger audience, someone who's kind of probably between the ages of like 10 to 12 or around that range. So
takes place in the High Republic.
Yeah, it takes place in the High Republic. So, and I just watched like the little documentary about it just to see where they were going to go with this. But I'm really excited because one of the things I've always wanted was the Old Republic. And to me, this is kind of like the next best thing, because one of my favorite things about Star Wars is, you know, Jedi and lightsabers and duels and that kind of era of time when kind of everything was good and people were, I mean, everything's not good, right? There are going to be lots of struggles and encounters, I'm sure, through it, but
it's bad.
Sidious isn't, or Palpatine isn't in the Senate yet, which is good. And I'm hoping to really get some older Sith, you know, before Palpatine, because I feel like we haven't really had much canon material with that.
Oh, but the only issue with that is that the Jedi and the Sith of this time period won't interact. Or if they do interact, the Jedi in the story will die. because at that point the Sith had been in hiding for 1,000 years by the time of the Phantom Menace. I think roughly that amount, and so we know that if they do meet, those Jedi aren't making it out. But we'll see. I do hope we see some old Sith, maybe Plagueis' master's master. Depending on how long they live, that might be really interesting. We'll really see.
I think that would be cool. And I think something that would be cool to see is kind of maybe a dark side Force user that isn't necessarily a Sith too. And I think they could easily expand upon areas in that sense.
It'll definitely be interesting. I hope that, because in episode 9 we're introduced to Exegol. I hope we learn a little bit more about that for the High Republic stuff. Because I would assume if the Sith were in hiding, they must have been on a planet like Exegol. Or just, I guess...
Yeah.
There are other ways to conceal yourself. You don't have to be hiding on another planet.
Palpatine was on Coruscant.
Yeah. Palpatine was at the heart of the galaxy, so I guess that was kind of a dumb thing to say.
It's okay. I'm not cutting it. But the next thing I have, and the last piece of news that I have is one of my personal favorites because it's a fan favorite, but Ahsoka has now been confirmed to be in season 2 of The Mandalorian, and it's going to be played by Rosario Dawson, I believe.
Rosario Dawson.
Yeah, so she was the nurse from Daredevil, right?
She was.
Yeah, and I'm really excited. I think she's a great actress, and I think she'll do really well in the role. And I'm just really excited to have a live-action Ahsoka, since I've been wanting it ever since I saw the Clone Wars, and I've read the book, and I'm excited to see her back in season 7 of the Clone Wars. But I think that's... What are your thoughts on it?
I'm really excited. I'm pretty impartial to the actress that takes up the role. If we couldn't get the voice actress to play her, then the next best thing would be somebody that kind of looks like Ahsoka, and I think Rosario Dawson definitely does, and she's a good actress, which is probably more important. But so I'm excited for that. But even more so, I'm just excited that she is going to be in season 2 and in live action, regardless of who plays her.
Yeah, I think it'll be good. And touching a little bit on the Rebels finale, do you think it's going to be her looking for Ezra at this point and believes he's still out there? Do you think that's going to come into play at all? I don't know if you saw the ending of Rebels or you know what I'm referring to. I can go over it.
I do. It might be that. I think it's going to have a lot more to do with Ahsoka and the child. Because as far as we know, the child is not a part of Luke's new Jedi Academy at that point.
You're talking about Baby Yoda child or a different child?
Baby Yoda.
The infant.
So
50-year-old infant.
50-year-old infant. Yeah, so I think Ahsoka is going to do something with that, or the Mandalorian may pass it off to her, or might be able to help Mando. So we'll see. That's definitely really interesting. I'm excited. I'm hoping for a duel between I'm losing his name right now, but the guy who has the Darksaber.
Oh yeah, I can't remember his name either. I want to know how he got it.
I want to know how he got it too. So it'd be interesting if we also saw live action Sabine, since before him, she was the last person that we saw with it. This takes place at almost the exact same time. I'm pretty sure Mandalorian's only a few years after fall of the Empire, correct? Yeah. So it's only, I think, between A New Hope and Return of the Jedi, it's only 4 or 5 years. Yeah. And then Mandalorian's only a couple years after that. So it's only 7 years. So there's a lot of characters that she can run into. And it'd also be really cool to see that Ahsoka is alive during this time period. Yeah, and that's one of the main things that makes me happy, is knowing that, well, at least she's out there, even if I'm not seeing the material. She didn't die in some off-screen encounter. Yeah. Well, because in episode 9, we hear her voice, and the presumption was that all the characters that are talking to Rey are dead, but that isn't necessarily the case. She still could be. If she dies in The Mandalorian Season 2, right, that'd be before Rey. I'm kind of hoping not. I hope Ahsoka just... Well, Dave Filoni is the producer, and he likes her way too much, I think, to kill her off. That's his baby, so I hope that they don't kill her off, because she's a great character, and we have enough tragedy in Star Wars as it is, so we don't need more of that. I do hope that, if we're going to see live-action Ahsoka, I would guess that she's not going to have like her own episode dedicated to her in the sense that it's going to follow her around, but that she'll interact with the Mandalorian. I would like some snippets of maybe if she's talked to Anakin's ghost, or she's met Luke, or like what's going on there. I think all that stuff would be really interesting to find out as well.
Yeah, I definitely think so too. But that was the last piece of news that I had. Hey, did you have anything you want to add news-wise?
No, Ahsoka was the biggest thing, I think, at least for me. High Republic's probably bigger news overall.
Yeah, I think also because it'll be a lot bigger of a thing, right? Because this will be a season that she's in, but the High Republic stuff's going to take different kinds of media, all different forms, and I think they're really going to go in depth and kind of expand the universe backwards, which is a direction I really like going in Star Wars. So that's just me personally, though.
I like that because they don't have to adhere to anything. They don't have to use the same characters. And granted, I love the core set of characters, but it's always tricky dealing with them, as we saw in episode 9. So I'm definitely looking forward to them going back in the past.
Yep. All right. So with that, I'm just going to say let's go into the meat of our discussion here, and that's going to be the first arc of the Clone Wars Season 7, starting off with Episode 1, The Bad Batch. Then it goes to Episode 2, A Distant Echo, Episode 3, On the Wings of Kiridax, and Episode 4, Unfinished Business. So just kind of, if you want to give a quick summary of everything we saw in that first arc then.
So very briefly, they're on a mission right now. And the Separatists are kind of outflanking the Republic right now. They seem to know other battle strategies. So Rex postures that maybe Echo is alive, or they've stolen some sort of information from him since they think he's dead at this point.
Yep.
Turns out he's alive, and he is feeding information, but not of his own volition. And so they free him. Anakin, the Bad Batch. And the Bad Batch is kind of a group of clones that all have special powers, or special mutations rather. So one's really smart, tactical. One has really keen senses. One is really strong. So kind of like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles of the Star Wars universe.
If they had a sniper on the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Just kind of a core group, and everyone's really unique. And so they rescue Echo. They eventually outflank the Separatists on this mission and beat them. Then it kind of ends, and that's like a really rough synopsis there, but it's really cool because we get to see Mace Windu, Anakin, Obi-Wan all interact with the clones and each other, and it's really exciting.
Yeah, so
I get a little bit of dark side Anakin.
Yeah, I know. I love that too. I'll get to that, but just like going to Episode 1, I just want to say that I loved the concept of the Bad Batch. I loved like all of those characters, and I thought they were really unique and brought an interesting take on the clones.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Though I will say I was not excited that this is one of the arcs that they were adapting. I wanted more. There was another arc.
Obi-Wan, kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah,
I was disappointed with the first episode a little bit because it didn't have any Anakin, but I thought the episode itself was still very strong.
Oh yeah, I actually think the whole thing came together really well, especially for something I wasn't that excited for. Yeah. I was excited for more Clone Wars, but not necessarily the stories that they chose to adapt. And I think they definitely did it justice here. And we got a lot of good Jedi moments, especially Anakin. And now that we're nearing so close to Episode 3, we're going to see that ramp up more and more, I assume.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting that Rex was covering for Anakin while he knew he was off with Padme. And I thought that was interesting that, Rex was kind of like Anakin's in the know guy. But then also Obi-Wan said, say, hi to Padme for me. So obviously, like, he clearly knows too. I think it's kind of funny that they alluded to that everybody
interesting
knows.
Because it seems like Rex knows directly, whereas Obi-Wan just kind of figured it out. That probably puts a strain on the relationship. I feel kind of bad for both of them. Anakin doesn't feel like he can talk to Obi-Wan about it, likely because of the Jedi Code, and Obi-Wan wants his friend to confide in him, and Rex knows. Which I guess if you're going to tell any clone or any soldier, it would be Rex. It was just funny that whole scene was really adorable with you know, Anakin and Padme, and Anakin being totally oblivious of her slight baby bump.
Tiny baby bump. That, yeah, I thought that was really kind of a nice moment too, especially seeing that Obi-Wan clearly knows, and he's just kind of trying to be a good guy about it. For even though he knows the codes and he's aware of everything, but I liked that a lot.
He's trying to make him comfortable, but it's too bad. It you know, we know that it doesn't succeed. But
Yeah,
another thing I really liked about this arc was Echo.
yeah,
Just first of all, that was really dark. When they pulled, he was like hooked up like Matrix style, being used, and he was like emaciated. Like it looks like he was fed just enough to keep him alive.
yeah.
I just thought that was
I feel like he
crazy.
wasn't even being fed. He was some in vitro tube. I'm sure that they were kind of just pumping him up with whatever. But it was really dark, and he kind of looked even afterwards, towards the end. You know, when he's free, he's still heavily like hindered by that. He's got all his Matrix style holes on him, and he's got one hand. But I thought it's really interesting that he's still able to interface with computers like a droid without all the other attachments and everything.
I agree. I think that's really cool. And you know, as we know, with the last episode, he becomes part of the Bad Batch.
Yeah, and it was
You
such
know,
a
after everything
bittersweet thing, you know. So
to go with Rex, but really the Bad Batch, with what we now know about them after the 4 episodes, he fits right in there.
yep, I think that was kind of the entire arc that they were showing, and I want to move a little bit into the Anakin stuff that we saw, because in this, I mean, the most recent episode, or sorry, the unfinished business episode for the last episode in this arc, it was, you got some really dark Anakin, which I freaking loved it, man. When he said, "I don't have such reservations," when the guy said, "You won't kill me."
You're a Jedi, you won't kill me, yeah. And Anakin's like, oh, you thought wrong, buddy. And he just kills him.
Yep. Well,
Granted,
cuts off 3 of his arms first.
Cuts off 3 of his arms first to threaten him, and then the General Trench, or I think Admiral or
Trench.
General Trench. Either way, he tries to kill Anakin first with this little shock thing,
Yeah.
and then Anakin stabs him,
Yeah.
and it's just enough, like, not even plausible deniability. He kind of got an excuse to do it.
Yeah. But I feel like that's kind of how he has slowly become, you know, turned a little darker, is everything he does has been on that line of, you know, technically it's justified, and technically he was doing his job. You know, when he kills Dooku, right? He's just doing his job as a Jedi, you know? And even when he's searching for Ahsoka's, whoever framed Ahsoka, I mean, he's going off the walls on all these people, and it's justified. So I think that's a way for him to slowly turn dark and take those steps to just like, keep going further into, just let me just go a little bit darker. And like you said, he has no reservations, and he stabs him, takes the thing, walks away, doesn't look twice, you know.
Because at this point, outside of the Tusken Raiders, we don't actually see Anakin killing a lot of people.
Yep, it's
A lot of
mainly
droids.
Yeah, and I think that has to do with the media that it's in, right? It's a kid show, so it has to be a little tamer in that aspect.
Being said, that moment's really good, and we get a little bit more and more, and you can kind of see shades of Darth Vader, where if you get in his head, obviously Darth Vader's a bad guy, but you could kind of see in his head, with how we see Anakin act, how he could easily justify those decisions.
Yep.
So he's not even fully committed to the dark side yet.
Yeah.
You could argue that he never was, but he's much less so now, and so you can see how it'd be even easier to justify those types of murders. This one was kind of self-defense. He could have not killed him if he really wanted to. He could have incapacitated him, but
I think so, but I actually think it was the wise decision. So the funny thing to me is, on the edge Anakin, right, balancing between light and dark, is, in my opinion, by and far the most effective Anakin. It's the most effective he has ever been.
that's because he makes kind of those hard decisions, and I don't know if it's like he keeps finding himself in situations where it's a little more justifiable and he's just getting lucky in that way, or if he's actively, you know, thinking about this sort of thing.
Yeah, I don't know either. But I I think he just finds himself to be completely justified, and there's nothing that he does that he thinks that was too far.
Yeah, it's at this point he believes, okay, the Republic's good guys, separatists are bad guys, and killing a bad guy, by most moral compasses isn't necessarily evil.
Yeah.
So I love that. I love seeing that. I'm hoping we see even more of that later in the season. But overall, I was really happy with this arc. Again, for something that I wasn't super excited for, they did a really good job. So I'm looking forward to the next one.
Yep, and as am I. And it just, yesterday the new episode of the next arc came out with Ahsoka, and I watched that and I really liked it, and we'll talk about that arc more as that wraps up in probably another month or so. But I'm excited, and I guess the one thing I want to say about that, because I know that's not really what this chat is about, but is I was not expecting. This is kind of like a prequel to season 7. It's a prequel to season 5, I think, too. So it happens right after Ahsoka leaves the Order, which I thought was interesting. I thought it was all going to be chronologically in order, but it doesn't appear to be that way.
That's a good point, and actually, I didn't know that. I had kind of just assumed that it was around the same time period.
Yeah.
But I guess it's not necessarily.
I don't believe it is. I believe as it started, she was leaving the Order and just kind of drove away, and perhaps it was a lot further down the line, and they just cut it in a way that made it look like it was just as she left the Order, but I think it really was a little further down the line.
The timeline's a little ambiguous, and not just because the series initially was told not chronologically. Just generally, the time frame of the war is supposed to be around 3 years, and it's kind of hard to place every single event.
Yeah, they have more battles in this 3-year war than I think any war in the history of wars have had, just because they like telling battle stories.
You can kind of tell where things take place, like based on Anakin's hair. It gets longer and longer.
Yeah, I really like his look in season 7 here. He really looks like he's almost just exhausted with the war and with the Order, and he's got the bags under his eyes, and he's kind of, the shading on his face is a lot darker, I think, than everybody else's.
For sure. I think it's doing a number on him. I mean, he's a general leading an army, and he's 20-something, low 20s. I mean, that's not... Yeah. That's a lot of pressure, especially with the whole Chosen One stuff. He probably feels pressure from that too, so he must be exhausted.
Yeah, I think so. But anyway, I think that's going to kind of wrap up our meat of this discussion about the Clone Wars Season 7 Arc 1. So we'll be back in a various amount of weeks. I cannot say when because our schedule makes no sense these days. So now I'm going to move into some fun facts. Do you want to go first, Ben?
So my favorite one, and it's a fun fact, and I hope over time becomes not a fun fact, and it just becomes common knowledge, is that it was Boba Fett that told Darth Vader, Anakin, who blew up the Death Star, and he finds out it's Luke Skywalker. And that's actually not even the interesting part. The interesting part of this comic is, he kind of goes through his memories, and him as in Darth Vader, and he's kind of recollecting. He goes, that moment when he asks if Padme's safe, is she all right? And the Emperor tells him that he killed her, and basically this kind of confirms that he didn't kill her. I mean, he may have played a part in killing her indirectly, but he didn't physically kill her like the Emperor led him to believe. And so he found out after 20 years that he lied. So I think that this was the big turning point in Darth Vader wanting to overthrow the Emperor.
Yeah,
I mean, really interesting, and
that's what he based his last 20 years of murdering people on.
Yeah, and he kind of finds out that that's a lie, and it's also probably the point where he feels like he can't go back now. But basically, the last 20 years of his life was based on something that's not true. So I feel for him in that moment. He almost breaks the window in the Star Destroyer. It goes through the whole memory of him talking to Padme about when she's telling him that she's pregnant. The whole thing is really intense and really sad. And I can't even believe that this moment is in a comic, because not that the comic book shouldn't have important moments, because they should, but it's so important to Darth Vader's character. Yeah, it needs to be more common knowledge. And it's one of those things that would have been in the films had they thought of it at the time, because it's so obvious
Yeah.
that it's like holy crap, that's crazy. So that's my big one. I'm super blown away by that. And then you can go with your fun fact, then I'll share my next one.
Yeah, so I don't have a fun fact that can top that for sure. But I guess my fun fact is going to be from, and I don't know if I'm stealing yours, but and this is kind of common knowledge at this point, is that from the Rise of Skywalker book, just confirming that Rey's dad, who was technically Palpatine's son, wasn't actually the case. It was a clone of Palpatine, and it was kind of like a failed clone, a bad batch, you may say, of Palpatine. And it's someone that had no Force abilities and kind of wanted nothing to do. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I'm kind of indifferent at the moment, but my only question is, like, how did he get away? I feel like there's a lot of logistical things that when that was kind of published, they didn't think through, like, well, what happened to him to get to that point where he was able to run away from whatever organization was cloning Palpatine and doing all those things. I don't know. It just seems a little weird, but again, I don't really have a hard
It's
feeling.
interesting, and I think in its attempt to answer questions, it's kind of raising more questions. And
Yeah, exactly.
like we could do a whole episode about the logistical
the
complications. Yeah, the logistical nightmare of just even the movie The Rise of Skywalker. And I liked it. I'm not saying that to poo-poo on it for anybody that enjoys it, but there's a lot of things holes that need to be filled, and the book expands, but it doesn't necessarily fill in those holes. It kind of just it adds a little bit, but doesn't fully answer the question. And some of those details don't matter, but it's just like you don't want your first question when you get an answer to something to be like, well, okay, but what about this?
Yeah, answer a question with a question, basically. That's kind of what happened with this, in my opinion. And they wanted to put a band-aid on it real quick because I feel like there was a lot of backlash against Palpatine being the father somehow. But to me, it kind of made sense that Palpatine could have had a son because he was a high politically connected person, and he does anything he can to gain power. So to me, I can totally believe that he tricked someone or seduced somebody in some way in his younger days to work his way up the political ladder. And to me, that made perfect sense. I'm like, okay, yeah, well, he did that to gain more power in some way, and didn't know that it left some random lady with a baby. So
I think I would have been happier if they just left it as he just, knocked boots with somebody, and then that's it at some point, and then that person escaped, or they didn't know that she was pregnant, and then that was it.
Yeah.
I think at the time there was some sort of assumption that he had a family, and it's like, you can have kids and not be a family,
and also not love them or care about them at all, which is definitely Palpatine's case.
Yeah, so I think I would have preferred they just kept it that he just, was intimate with somebody.
Yeah.
And then left it at that, because not that this explanation is bad, it's just complicated.
Yeah, it is. It raises too many questions, and now I feel like we're going to get a lot of answers to these questions, which to me almost feel worthless again. It's like, well, but there's so many better Star Wars stories that I could be listening to right now than, the logistical nightmares of how this clone escaped and then got married and had, I don't know.
Yeah, it's all very strange, and also just... you're right that it feels like it's going to take place of other stories that would be more interesting, just because now we have to answer all these questions that the movie and now the novel raised. But to maybe a fun fact that's not so complicated and is more just raises questions, but in an interesting way, not in like a how are they going to explain this sort of way.
Yeah.
So my next fun fact is from the new run of Darth Vader comics from this year, and this is gonna be really interesting, and it's gonna be a spoiler for you, and I highly suggest that you read them. But
great, I love spoilers.
Darth Vader actually finds somebody who looks exactly like Padme, and this kind of ties into our first piece of news from the day for Queen's Peril, is that it's actually one of Padme's handmaidens who looks a lot like her,
Yeah.
and it's Sabe from the Queen's Shadow book. And I believe that she's also in the movies, but I don't know that she's explicitly named.
Yeah, I mean, well, there
In the
were like a
films?
bunch of them that they like switched in episode 1, you know, when it was like a disguised queen.
And it's really weird because he kind of freaks out. And the interesting thing about this moment is it's not like a Darth Vader, like a I'm gonna kill this person freak out. It's like a what is going on? Because at first he's like, you know, Padme, and she's like, no. Or well, at first she does kind of, you know, play the game, but eventually concedes that she's not. And then Darth Vader's with the droid, and the droid explains that it's Sabe, one of Padme's handmaidens.
Mm.
And I won't get into any more details than that because I think that you should read it, and I think anybody
Yeah.
who happens to be listening should read it.
Yeah,
But-
what is that from?
Darth Vader, 2020, so
Okay,
this
the comic.
year, yeah. And actually, my first fun fact was from Darth Vader, the first Marvel comic run,
Very good.
and it's issue number 6 was that one, and then this was issue number 2.
Yeah,
so-
I'll definitely have to start reading those because I feel like I'm missing a lot of important Darth Vader knowledge, and I love seeing him be a badass in everything he does anyway, so it's always a blast.
This one is interesting because all of these moments take place right after the Empire Strikes Back, so he's kind of shook after, you know, Luke yeeted himself off the platform.
Does he assume
And-
that Luke's dead there, or does he? I mean, I'm sure he probably he feels it in the Force that Luke isn't dead.
He knows that he's not, and we also see later in the movie. I mean, it's probably been a while, but
It has been a while.
that they do speak over the Force kind
okay.
of soon after that.
Yeah.
And without getting into too many spoilers or details, Vader is shook, and not in like I said, not in an angry Vader way, in a more obvious I'm putting up a wall defense mechanism sort of way.
Yeah. Trying to block it out.
So as he kind of in really intense denial, and it's a lot more transparent than it is in any of the films,
Yeah.
which I really like because we see a lot of Anakin in these moments.
Yeah.
So that's really exciting.
That is a really fun fact too, man. Kind of the fun facts. I'll have to step my game up next time. But
Do you have any more, or are
think-
you out?
I think that was my only one for today. Did you have more? Did you want to keep going? You can rattle them off, man. We can
To
shoot
pile
them
on
style.
top of the clone, you know,
Yep.
Palpatine's son
Yep,
being
yep.
a clone, is, you know, we also find out that the body that Palpatine is in Rise of Skywalker is a clone.
Yes.
And
yes.
so people wonder why it's old, and it's just because at that point it had deteriorated, and as he was falling down the Death Star shaft, he pushed his consciousness away into a clone.
Which was in Legends for a long time that's what happened to Palpatine. So it's not like they pulled that idea out of nowhere.
Oh, it's out of nowhere in the sense that I don't think the previous 2 films in the saga set this up at all.
Agreed.
But it's not a new idea. I didn't think it was handled well in Legends, and I don't think it's handled that well in canon now, but it is a little bit better than in Legends. Legends, it was ridiculous how many times he would move around to different clone bodies. And the more interesting part of that actually is that he had kind of sensed a flickering light in Vader for a while. So
Yep.
he had been preparing the contingency plan, but the clone wasn't ready at the time. He wasn't expecting Vader to turn on him at that moment. And that's kind of why he's in this deteriorated corpse of a
Yeah.
body.
That is a really interesting revelation, if I can speak today. But yeah, I think that's really cool how he was able to do that. And I assume that he didn't transfer his soul again. And the way I look at it is he was falling down a shaft for quite a while. He had a lot of time to think and concentrate on forcing his soul out of his body and like willing it to go somewhere else. Whereas in the movie, he was fighting Rey. He didn't have that time to devote all his energy and time into thinking about pushing his soul somewhere else.
Oh, and I hope not. I hope at this point they just throw in a line that says, you know, we made sure that there were no more clones of him, and, you know, whatever.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Let's move on. Come on, there's got to be a new big baddie out there in the universe that we can go fight.
Oh yeah. It kind of, the novelization doesn't really clear anything up about Snoke, from what I can tell. So we still have a lot of questions that need to be answered, but at least we got those. I think those were some big ones that were very confusing after having seen the movie.
Yep, I definitely agree. But I think that's going to wrap it up for this episode of Republic Broadcasting. So if you're listening, I hope you enjoyed, hope you learned a fun fact, and if you have any other thoughts about the Bad Batch and anything that you liked or any news that we've left out, because I'm sure there's a lot, there's some every week, and I just can't keep up with it at all. But please comment below, and we'll talk to you later. Broadcasting out.